The world of Lira had forgotten what sunlight looked like. For 300 years, darkness covered the skies, and cold shadows ruled the land. The people lived in fear of the shadow beasts, creatures born from the endless night. The royal family, once protectors of the light, was gone. Only Princess Lira survived, hidden in the ruins of her ancestors. Lira walked through the abandoned city of Lunaris, her heart racing. She clutched a small glowing pendant around her neck, a gift from her father before the darkness took him. The pendant gave her warmth, but it couldn't protect her from what hunted her now. The shadow beasts were close. Lira heard the low growl behind her. The creatures never made mistakes. They could smell fear, and Lira's fear was strong. She turned a corner and stopped. Dead end. A wall of black stone blocked her path. Her breath quickened as the growls grew louder. A beast stepped into view. Its eyes glowed like burning coals, and its body moved like liquid shadow. It grinned with sharp teeth, enjoying her terror. Lira's hand tightened around her pendant. "I won't let you win," she whispered. The beast leaped toward her. Suddenly, there was a loud blast. A bright flash cut through the darkness. The beast screamed as a fiery bolt struck its chest. It stumbled back, hissing in pain. Another blast followed, and the creature vanished into smoke. Lira turned in shock. A figure stepped out from the shadows, holding a strange weapon that hummed with energy. The figure wore battle armor scratched from many fights. His face was hard and tired, but his eyes were sharp and focused. He was human. "You okay?" the man asked, voice rough. Lira stared. Who are you?" "Commander Jake Riker," he said, scanning the area. "I'm lost here. Crash landed a few days ago. Lucky I found you before they did." Another growl echoed through the streets. Jake's grip on the weapon tightened. "We need to move. Now." Lira hesitated, but she knew he was right. She followed him through the maze of ruins, heart pounding. They reached a crumbling tower and ducked inside. Jake secured the entrance with a small device. A faint blue shield shimmered across the door. "That'll slow them down," Jake said, sitting against the wall. He wiped sweat from his forehead. "What the hell are those things?" "Shadow beasts," Lira said softly, "born when the light core was destroyed. They hunt anyone who resists the darkness." Jake frowned. "Light core." "It was the heart of Lira," Lira explained. "It gave us warmth and life. Without it, the darkness came. The Shadow Lord took control and sent his beasts to destroy us." Her voice cracked. "My family tried to stop them. They died protecting the light." Jake's eyes softened. He understood loss. "I'm sorry," he said. A sharp hiss came from outside. The beasts were gathering. "They won't stop," Lira whispered. "They can smell fear." Jake's jaw tightened. "Good thing I'm not scared," he said, standing up. "We need a plan." Lira showed him the glowing pendant. "This is part of the light core. My father said it can lead us to the core's resting place." Jake studied the pendant. "Then that's our mission." The beast slammed into the shield. The blue light flickered. "Time to go," Jake said, raising his weapon. "Stick close to me." They rushed out the back exit and sprinted through the streets. The beasts howled behind them. "Where's the pendant leading us?" Jake shouted. Lira glanced at the glowing stone. "North, toward the mountains." Jake cursed under his breath. Figures, always mountains. They ran through the dark streets. Shadowy figures appeared on rooftops, tracking them like wolves. Jake fired at them while moving. The beasts dodged most blasts, but a few fell, screeching. Ahead, an old stone bridge crossed a deep canyon. The pendant's light grew stronger. "Over the bridge," Lira said. They dashed onto the bridge. The beasts followed, claws scraping the stone. Jake stopped halfway across. "Go," he shouted to Lira. She hesitated. "What are you doing?" "Just go," Jake fired at the creatures. They slowed but kept coming. Jake reached into his vest and pulled out a small device. He pressed a button and dropped it on the bridge. "Run faster," he yelled. Lira sprinted. The pendant's light guided her to safety just as Jake turned and ran. The beasts chased him. Then the device beeped. With a deafening boom, the bridge exploded, collapsing into the canyon. The beasts fell into the abyss. Jake barely made it, landing beside Lira on the other side. They lay there, gasping for breath. The night was silent again. "That was close," Jake said. Lira smiled faintly. "You're insane." "Yeah," Jake agreed. "But it worked." The pendant glowed brighter, pointing toward the mountains ahead. The core of dawn was waiting for them. The battle for Lira had just begun. The night sky above Lira stretched endlessly, thick with swirling shadows. The stars, once symbols of hope for the people, were long forgotten beneath the eternal darkness. Only the soft, steady glow of the pendant around Lira's neck pierced the gloom. Its pale blue light pulsed like a heartbeat, guiding them toward the mountains that loomed far on the horizon. Lira adjusted her cloak and glanced at Jake, who walked beside her with his plasma rifle held tight. His movements were careful, eyes always scanning the dark. She admired his focus. He moved like a soldier, calculated, alert, and ready to react in an instant. "Still nothing?" Jake asked, his voice low. Lira shook her head. "The pendant pulls us north, but we have no idea what we'll find." Jake grunted. "As long as it's not more of those shadow freaks." They trudged through the wastelands of Lunaris, where broken towers leaned like skeletons against the sky. Each step crunched on brittle, glass-like ground formed when the darkness fell. The air was thin and cold, carrying a faint metallic taste that made breathing uncomfortable. "How long has it been like this?" Jake asked after a while. 300 years, Lira answered. "The light core was destroyed in the final battle against the Shadow Lord. My ancestors tried to protect it, but they failed." She swallowed hard. "Since then, the beasts came. They thrive in the darkness, feeding on fear. The core's power kept them away once. Without it, they took everything." Jake's jaw tightened. "Sounds like the human wars back on Earth," he said. "Different enemy, same story." Suddenly, the pendant flickered. The light grew weaker. Lira stopped. "Something's wrong." Jake knelt and placed his hand on the ground. It vibrated with a low hum. His instincts screamed danger. "Something big is coming," he said, standing. He raised his rifle. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Cracks split the surface, and a deep growl rumbled from below. Lira's eyes widened. "The ground is hollow here," she said. "We need tow." The earth collapsed beneath them. They fell through the darkness, crashing into layers of rock and dust, before landing on cold, hard ground. Jake coughed and turned on the light on his wrist. The beam cut through the shadows, revealing a cavern with smooth walls marked by strange symbols. Lira groaned beside him. "Where are we?" Jake helped her up. "Underground. And not by accident." The pendant glowed again, brighter than before. Its light pointed toward a massive stone door carved with unfamiliar markings. In the center, a symbol of a sunburst stood out. "This is ancient Solarian script," Lira said. "It says, 'Where courage walks, light follows.'" Jake studied the door. There was no handle, only a small circular indentation. Lira touched the pendant to the circle. The stone vibrated, and the door rumbled open, revealing a spiral staircase that led deeper underground. Jake gave a low whistle. "Guess we go in." They descended the staircase. The walls were covered with murals showing humans and Solarians fighting together against monstrous shadow creatures. In one mural, a human warrior held a glowing core high above his head, like driving the shadows away. "Humans helped us once," Lira whispered. "I thought it was just a myth." "Looks like your myths are real," Jake replied. "And humans were part of this war before." The stairs ended in a circular chamber. In the center stood a pedestal holding a crystalline sphere. Elira approached it, and the pendant pulsed in response. The sphere glowed with faint light and began to hum. Images flickered in the air above the sphere. A holographic recording of an old Silurian figure appeared. His face was solemn, eyes heavy with warning. "If you see this," the figure said, "then the light core has fallen. The darkness has returned, but hope remains." The core was not destroyed. It was hidden. Only the royal bloodline and the courage of humanity can restore it. Find the core at Dawnfall Ridge. The image vanished. Dawnfall Ridge, Elira repeated. That's in the northern mountains. Jake exhaled. At least we have a name. The sphere's light dimmed, but then the air grew cold. The pendant's light flickered as if warning them. "We need to go," Jake said, backing toward the staircase. The shadows in the corners shifted. 2 red eyes appeared, followed by another and another. Shadow beasts emerged, their smoky bodies twisting unnaturally. "Run," Jake shouted. They bolted up the stairs as the beasts charged after them. Jake fired his rifle, blasts of blue light striking the creatures. The shots slowed them, but the beasts kept coming. Elira reached the top first. She placed the pendant into the door's slot again. The stone groaned, closing painfully slow. The beasts climbed faster. "Come on, Jake," Elira screamed. Jake sprinted up the last steps and dove through the gap. The beasts lunged after him, but the door slammed shut with a deafening thud. Silence followed except for their heavy breathing. "That was too close," Jake said, lying on his back. Elira sat beside him. "They know we're looking for the core now." Jake wiped sweat from his brow. "Let them know. We'll find it first." The pendant glowed brighter, pointing toward the distant mountains. The journey had just begun. And now, the Shadow Lord knew they were coming. The cold wind howled across the wastelands as Elira and Jake pressed forward toward the mountains. The pendant's soft blue light guided them, flickering like a heartbeat. Each step they took brought them closer to the core of dawn, and closer to danger. The beasts were watching. They could feel it in the air, thick with an unnatural chill that raised the hair on their necks. They hadn't spoken much since escaping the underground chamber. Jake's mind churned with questions about the murals they had seen. Humans and Silurians fighting together against the darkness. His own ancestors, perhaps, had once stood on this alien world, weapons in hand, battling the same enemy that now hunted them. Elira broke the silence. "The pendant's glow is stronger. We're close." Jake nodded, scanning the landscape. The ground here was uneven and brittle, like frozen ash. Ahead, the mountains rose like jagged teeth. Somewhere beyond those peaks lay Dawnfall Ridge and the core of dawn. Suddenly, a faint hum vibrated through the ground. Jake froze and knelt to touch the earth. It was rhythmic, mechanical. Not the beasts. This was different. "Get down," Jake ordered. They crouched behind a boulder as the sound grew louder. From the shadows emerged a sleek, black hovercraft with angular armor and glowing blue thrusters. The craft bore the insignia of the old Silurian monarchy, a sunburst with twin stars. Elira gasped. "That's royal tech." From before the darkness, the craft landed nearby. Its side hatch hissed open, and 5 armored figures stepped out. They wore silver exosuits with visors hiding their faces. Each suit had the sunburst insignia on the chest. One figure stepped forward, removing their helmet. A tall Silurian woman with sharp, angular features and silver-white hair stood revealed. Her glowing purple eyes locked onto Elira. "Princess Lira," the woman said, voice smooth but cold. "You survived." The Lyra stood slowly, unsure if she should feel relief or fear. Who are you?" "I am Commander Ceres of the Light Council. We've searched for you for years." Ceres's gaze shifted to Jake. "And your human companion?" Jake stood beside Elira, gripping his rifle tightly. "Commander Jake Riker," he said. "Long way from home." Cirrus smiled faintly. Indeed, humans were once allies of Lira, but that was long ago. Elira's heart raced. The Light Council. She had thought they were gone. Legends told of their betrayal when the core fell, but maybe she had misunderstood. Maybe they could help. "Why are you here?" Elira asked. "To help you, Princess," Cirrus said. "You seek the core of dawn, yes?" Elira hesitated. "Yes, but how do you know?" Cirrus's expression remained unreadable. "The pendant called to us. It is connected to the core, and the core is connected to us all. Come, the council has resources you need. You cannot face the Shadow Lord alone." Elira exchanged a wary glance with Jake. He shook his head slightly. Something felt off. But Elira wanted to trust Cirrus. The council represented the old ways, the era of light. Reluctantly, they followed Cirrus and her soldiers onto the hovercraft. The hovercraft raced through the wastelands, silent except for the hum of the engines. Jake sat near the rear, pretending to inspect his weapon while watching the soldiers. Their movements were too controlled, too synchronized. Elira sat beside Cirrus. "You knew my parents?" she asked softly. "Yes," Cirrus replied. "They were brave, but misguided. They believed in unity. They thought the light core belonged to all people." "And it doesn't?" Elira asked. Cirrus's lips thinned. "Power cannot be shared. It must be controlled." The pendant around Elira's neck dimmed slightly, as if reacting to the words. Jake's grip tightened on his rifle. The hovercraft arrived at a massive underground complex carved into the mountainside. The structure was old, but active. As they descended into the hangar, Elira noticed lines of dormant battle mechs and automated cannons lining the walls. "This place wasn't built for defense," Jake muttered. "It's an armory." Cirrus gestured for them to follow her through a wide corridor. The pendant's light flickered again, weaker now. Elira touched it nervously. They entered a vast chamber with a high ceiling. In the center stood a raised platform where a crystal orb hovered, glowing faintly with blue energy. Surrounding it were several hooded figures standing in a circle. "The council," Cirrus said. The figures turned toward them. One of them stepped forward and lowered his hood. His face was pale, almost translucent, with eyes like black mirrors. "Princess Lira," the man said. "At last." "Who are you?" she asked, voice trembling. "I am Elder Malric. We have awaited your return." Elira felt the pendant pulse rapidly against her chest. "You're not here to restore the core, are you?" "No," Malric said softly. "We are here to claim it." The soldiers moved. Before Jake could react, they fired energy nets at him, tangling his limbs and knocking his weapon away. Elira tried to run, but Cirrus grabbed her arm, forcing her to the platform. "Let me go," Elira screamed. Malric raised his hands, and the orb glowed brighter. Shadows poured from it like smoke, swirling toward the pendant around Elira's neck. "The royal bloodline and human courage," Malric said. "That's what the core needs. But we no longer need both. Only the bloodline." The pendant shattered with a crack. The swirling shadows surged into Elira's chest. She screamed as cold darkness filled her veins. The chamber trembled. The hooded figures raised their arms in triumph. Jake roared in fury, fighting against the net. One soldier aimed a stun baton at his head, but Jake twisted and kicked the soldier's knee. The man collapsed, and Jake grabbed the baton. With a growl, he shattered the net's locking mechanism and charged toward the platform. "Stop him," Malric shouted. Jake launched himself at Cirrus, slamming the baton into her chest. Sparks exploded from her armor. She fell, gasping. He lifted Elira from the platform. Her eyes were open but unfocused, her veins glowing faintly with dark energy. "Elira, stay with me," Jake pleaded. The shadows swirled toward them. Jake fired wildly at the orb. The crystal cracked, releasing a high-pitched shriek. The shadows recoiled. The cavern shook. Jake carried Lira toward the exit. Behind them, Malric screamed in rage. "You can't stop the darkness, human." Malric's voice echoed. "The core will be ours." The ceiling collapsed, separating Jake and Lira from their pursuers. Outside, the hovercraft stood unguarded. Jake dragged Lira aboard and sealed the hatch. The engines roared to life. As they flew into the night, Lira stirred. "Jake, they took the light," she whispered, tears running down her cheeks. Jake clenched his jaw. "Then we'll take it back." The mountains of Dawnfall Ridge rose ahead, their peaks hiding the core of dawn. And behind them, the Light Council prepared for war. The hovercraft cut through the thick, cold air of the wastelands. The darkness outside felt heavier now, pressing against the craft's windows like a living thing. Jake gripped the controls with white-knuckled hands, eyes locked on the horizon. The mountains of Dawnfall Ridge loomed ahead, jagged and endless. Somewhere within those peaks lay the core of dawn, their only hope. Lira lay strapped into the seat beside him, her body trembling, her skin pale with faint black veins running along her temples. The pendant had shattered back in the council's chamber, and with it, something had broken inside her. Shadow energy pulsed faintly beneath her skin, and every so often she whimpered in pain. "Stay with me, princess," Jake said softly, his heart tightening each time she stirred. She opened her eyes briefly, the irises flickering between their usual violet and a dull black. "The council, they want the core, to spread the darkness everywhere," she whispered. "The core, it needs human courage." "Yeah, well, lucky for you, I'm stubborn as hell," Jake said with forced confidence. He didn't understand the connection between humans and the core, but he didn't need to. He only knew one thing. They had to reach the core before the council did. The hovercraft's navigation system beeped. They were approaching the base of the northern mountains. Jake switched to manual control and brought the craft low, skimming the ground to avoid detection. The terrain became rougher, with massive cracks and deep fissures running through the land like scars. The pendant was gone, but Lira's veins still glowed faintly, as though something inside her was guiding them. Her breathing quickened as the hovercraft neared a narrow pass between two towering peaks. "There," she rasped, pointing weakly. "Through the pass. The core is calling." Jake adjusted their course and entered the narrow pass. The rocky walls closed around them, so close that the hovercraft's scanners beeped in warning. The sky above vanished into shadows, and the temperature dropped sharply. Frost formed on the windows. "Feels like we just stepped into someone's tomb," Jake muttered. The pass opened suddenly into a vast, hidden valley. In its center stood a colossal black spire that rose into the sky like a spear piercing the heavens. At its base, swirling blue light pulsed through cracks in the ground, forming veins that radiated outward. "The core," Lira whispered. Jake landed the hovercraft at the valley's edge. He grabbed his rifle, threw on his gear, and carefully lifted Lira into his arms. Her body was cold, and the dark veins on her skin pulsed like infected wounds. "Hang in there, princess," he said. He carried her toward the spire. The ground beneath them vibrated with a steady rhythm, like the slow heartbeat of a sleeping giant. The closer they got, the brighter the blue veins in the ground became. The darkness here wasn't empty. It recoiled from the core's light, curling away like smoke from a flame. They reached the base of the spire. A stone door, covered in intricate carvings of humans and Solarians standing side by side, barred their path. In the center of the door was a circular indentation, similar to the one they had seen before. "How do we open it without the pendant?" Jake asked. Lira stirred weakly. "The core knows human courage. You just need to believe." Jake stared at her, then at the door. Believe. He had fought countless battles, lost comrades, and survived impossible odds through training and instinct, not belief. But this was different. This was Solara's ancient mystery, not human warfare. He placed his palm against the stone circle. The surface was icy cold. He took a deep breath and thought of Earth, of the stories of his ancestors fighting against impossible enemies, of the murals in the underground chamber. Humans had stood against the darkness before. "I'm here," he said softly. "I'm here to fight for the light, to protect Lira, to stop the Shadow Lord." The stone beneath his hand grew warm. The carvings on the door lit up with golden light, spreading from the center to the edges like water filling cracks. The ground trembled. With a low rumble, the door split down the middle and slid open. Behind the door was a massive chamber. The walls shimmered with faint, swirling patterns of light. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal of obsidian crystal. Suspended above it, rotating slowly, was the core of dawn. The core was larger than Jake had expected, almost a meter wide. Its surface glowed with shifting patterns of blue and gold light. The light didn't just illuminate the chamber, it pushed against the oppressive darkness outside, holding it at bay. Jake carried Lira to the pedestal. Her eyes fluttered open as the core's glow reflected on her face. The dark veins on her skin pulsed faster. "It wants me," she whispered. "But it needs you too." Jake hesitated. "What do we do?" Lira lifted her trembling hand toward the core. The energy inside it pulsed in response, like it recognized her. But when she tried to touch it, the shadows in her veins surged outward, crackling across her skin. She cried out in pain. Jake grabbed her hand. The moment their hands touched the core, the chamber exploded with light. A voice, deep and resonant, filled the space. "The core of dawn awaits the union of royal blood and human courage. Are you willing to sacrifice everything to restore the light?" Jake swallowed hard. "Yes," he said. "Whatever it takes." The core's energy surged through him. Memories flashed through his mind. Earth's wars, ancient battles against impossible odds, human acts of bravery across centuries. The energy connected him to Lira, to the countless generations that had come before. Lira's body arched as the light pushed the shadow energy out of her veins. The darkness screamed as it was burned away. Her eyes turned bright violet again, clear and sharp. The core glowed brighter and shot a beam of golden light through the chamber's roof into the sky. Outside, the oppressive darkness recoiled as the beam pierced the eternal clouds. The first faint glimmer of dawn touched the mountain peaks. Lira gasped, sitting up. We did it." Jake sagged to his knees, exhausted. But relief was short-lived. A deep, inhuman voice echoed from outside the spire. "You dare awaken the light." The shadows at the valley's edge thickened, coiling into a monstrous figure with crimson eyes. The Shadow Lord had come. Jake rose, gripping his rifle. The core was awake, but the battle for Solara had just begun. The ground trembled beneath Jake and Lira as the Shadow Lord's presence darkened the valley. The core of dawn's golden beam cut through the sky, pushing back the endless night, but the shadows coiled like a living storm at the edges of the light. From that storm, a figure emerged, tall, thin, and wreathed in flowing black mist. Its eyes glowed crimson, sharp, and unyielding. Its voice rumbled like distant thunder. "You awakened the core, little princess, and brought a human to this sacred place. Foolish." Lira clutched Jake's arm as the figure approached. The Shadow Lord's form was indistinct, its shape shifting with each step. At times it looked humanoid, then it stretched into a serpentine mass, before snapping back to a cloaked figure. The air around it crackled with icy dread. Jake raised his plasma rifle and took aim. His hands were steady, but his mind raced. The core had awakened, but that alone wouldn't stop this creature. The murals they had seen showed humans and Solarians fighting together. But against this, it seemed impossible. "Stay behind me," Jake said. Lira shook her head. "The core needs both of us. We have to fight together." The Shadow Lord's laughter echoed through the chamber. The core needs nothing but darkness. Light is a fleeting illusion. Fear is eternal. With a sudden motion, the Shadow Lord thrust a clawed hand forward. A wave of black energy shot across the chamber, slamming into the core's protective light. The golden glow flickered. Cracks spread across the ground. Jake fired his rifle. The blue plasma bolt struck the Shadow Lord's chest. The creature staggered but did not fall. Its form rippled where the bolt hit, like smoke pierced by wind. Jake fired again and again, each shot making the creature recoil slightly, but it kept advancing. The Shadow Lord raised its hand. Tendrils of shadow shot toward Jake. He rolled to the side, but one tendril coiled around his ankle and yanked him off his feet. "Jake!" Elira screamed. The tendril lifted Jake into the air and slammed him against a pillar. Pain exploded in his chest as the rifle clattered to the floor. The shadow tightened around his neck, choking the breath from him. The creature leaned closer. "Ah, human courage," it whispered. "It burns bright, but it always breaks." Jake struggled against the shadow's grip, but the darkness felt like solid iron. Spots danced in his vision. Elira sprinted to the core, placing both hands on its glowing surface. The light responded, growing brighter. A pulse of energy surged outward, cutting through the shadows and forcing the Shadow Lord back. Jake dropped to the ground, gasping. The Shadow Lord howled in fury. The core's light intensified, pushing the darkness toward the edges of the chamber. Elira stood beside the glowing sphere, her eyes shining with determination. "We can't hold it back forever," she said. "The core needs more energy." Jake staggered to his feet. "What kind of energy?" Elira placed a hand over her heart. "It needs human courage and royal blood. Together." Jake's heart sank. The murals, they showed humans and Solarians standing side by side. They had both given everything to stop the darkness. He looked at Elira. Her face was pale, her body trembling from the effort of channeling the core's light. If she tried to do this alone, it would kill her. "No," Jake said firmly. "We'll do it together." He stepped to the pedestal and placed his hand beside hers on the core. It was warm, alive, and vibrating with power. The moment his hand touched the surface, the energy surged into his body. His muscles tightened, his mind flooded with memories of long-forgotten battles. Humans standing shoulder to shoulder with Solarians against waves of shadow. The Shadow Lord roared, sensing the shift. "You cannot defeat me. I am the void. I am the night eternal." The shadows surged forward again. Jake gritted his teeth. "Push," he shouted. Together, Jake and Elira poured their strength into the core. The sphere pulsed, sending waves of light into the chamber. The Shadow Lord howled as the golden glow struck its form. Outside, the beam shooting into the sky grew thicker, hotter, piercing the eternal clouds. The darkness above twisted violently, resisting the light. And then, with a sound like glass shattering, the sky cracked open. The first rays of sunlight in 300 years filled into the valley. The Shadow Lord screamed as the light touched its form. Its misty body ignited with white fire. The crimson eyes glared at Jake one last time. "You think you've won, human. Light may return, but fear never dies." The creature's form disintegrated into ash, swept away by the sunlight now flooding the valley. The ground stopped shaking. The core hummed with steady, gentle light. The oppressive cold vanished, replaced by warmth that spread across the land. The sky above cleared, revealing a pale blue dawn. Jake collapsed to his knees, chest heaving. Elira dropped beside him, gripping his arm. "We did it," she whispered. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at the sun for the first time in her life. Jake gave a weak smile. "Yeah, guess we did." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the sun rise. The light poured across the valley, melting the frost, turning the lifeless ground into rich soil. In the distance, trees began to sprout as life returned to Xalora. But their victory was not yet complete. The sound of distant engines broke the peace. Jake turned and saw sleek, black hovercrafts racing toward the spire. The insignia of the Light Council glinted on their hulls. "Ceres," Jake growled. Elira stood, eyes hardening. "They're coming for the core." Jake checked his rifle. It was damaged but still functional. "We hold them here." Elira placed her hand on the core. It responded instantly, sending a pulse of energy through the ground. Stone barricades rose around the spire's entrance. The core wasn't just a source of light. It was the heart of the planet. The hovercrafts landed just beyond the barricades. Dozens of armored soldiers poured out, led by Ceres and Elder Malric. Malric's black eyes locked onto Elira. "The core belongs to the Council," he declared. "Surrender it, and we will let you live." Elira stood beside Jake, her eyes glowing with core light. "The core belongs to no one," she said. "It protects the people, not the powerful." Jake raised his rifle. "Guess that means no deal." The Council soldiers charged. Plasma bolts streaked through the air. Jake fired back, dropping one soldier with a headshot. Elira raised her hands, and the core's energy surged through her. A wave of light blasted from her palms, knocking the front line of enemies backward. The battle for the core had begun. The sky above Dawnfall Ridge was no longer an endless void. The sun, fragile and pale, stretched its light across the valley for the first time in 3 centuries. The warmth of that dawn kissed the land, awakening life from its long, cold slumber. But that same light revealed the approaching army of the Light Council, dark shapes descending from the mountains like a plague of armored vultures. Jake stood with his back to the core, his rifle aimed at the oncoming forces. The spire hummed softly behind him, its light no longer flickering but glowing with steady determination. Elira stood beside the core, her hands resting on its surface. Her eyes, now a brilliant violet with veins of gold, reflected the energy pulsing through her. The core had accepted her, but it also demanded much from her. Jake could see her shoulders trembling from the strain. "How long can you keep the defenses up?" Jake asked, never taking his eyes off the approaching troops. "I don't know," Elira admitted. "The core gives strength, but it needs human resolve. If you fall, it will weaken." Jake adjusted his rifle. "Yeah, well, I'm not planning on falling anytime soon." The Light Council hovercrafts came to a halt just beyond the raised stone barricades the core had summoned. From the lead craft, Commander Ceres emerged, her silver armor gleaming under the newborn sun. Elder Malric followed, his pale skin almost glowing against the dark landscape. Soldiers spread out behind them, plasma rifles raised. "Princess Lira." Malric's voice echoed across the battlefield. "The core is ours by right. Surrender it now, and you and your human companion will live. Resist, and we will leave no stone unbroken." Elira lifted her chin. "You want the core to spread the darkness across the galaxy. I won't let that happen." Malric's lips twisted into a smile. "The galaxy thrives in order, Princess, and order comes from fear." Jake muttered, "This guy really loves hearing himself talk." Ceres raised her hand. The soldiers charge. Jake squeezed the trigger. His plasma rifle barked, sending blue bolts into the onrushing troops. The first row fell, their armor scorched and smoking, but the others pressed on. The Council soldiers moved with unnerving precision, firing in synchronized bursts. The ground shook as the core responded to the danger. Cracks appeared in the earth beneath the attackers. Stone spikes shot upward, impaling some and forcing others to scatter. "Nice trick," Jake said. Elira's eyes glowed brighter. "The core listens to willpower. It responds to belief." "Then believe harder." Jake ducked as plasma fire burned the air above his head. He fired at a cluster of soldiers flanking the spire, dropping 3. But the enemy kept coming. Suddenly, the ground near the core splintered. Black tendrils slithered from the cracks, oily and pulsating. Jake's stomach dropped. "That's not normal," he said. Elira's face paled. "The shadow energy. It's still connected to the core. The Council's corruption hasn't been fully purged. Malric raised both hands. Shadows coiled from his fingertips, sinking into the earth. The light around the spire dimmed. Light and shadow are two sides of the same power, Malric called out. And I control both. The tendrils lashed toward Lira. Jake dove, tackling her to the ground as black energy cracked the stone where she stood. Thanks, she gasped. Don't thank me yet, Jake said. He swung his rifle toward Malric and fired. The plasma bolt struck the elder in the chest, but passed through him like smoke. Malric laughed. Your weapons are useless, human. Cirrus charged through the chaos toward the core, plasma sword ignited in her hand. Jake saw her coming too late. Lira, move. Lira turned, but Cirrus was faster. The commander swung the sword downward. Lira raised her arm to block, and the blade sliced through her shoulder. She screamed, collapsing to her knees. Princess. Jake fired at Cirrus, but she dodged effortlessly, stepping closer to the core. The core's light flickered. The tendrils of darkness grew thicker. No, Jake growled. He sprinted toward Cirrus, firing until his rifle overheated. The commander swung her plasma sword at him. Jake ducked, feeling the heat of the blade pass inches from his face. He slammed his rifle into her gut, knocking her back. Cirrus stumbled but didn't fall. Her eyes glowed with shadow energy. Humans were always tools, she sneered. You were never meant to stand beside the core. She lunged again. Jake dodged, then rammed his shoulder into her. They hit the ground together, grappling for control. Cirrus was stronger, her movements enhanced by shadow power. Lira, clutching her wounded shoulder, reached for the core with her uninjured arm. Please, she whispered. Help us. The core's glow intensified for a moment, but then dimmed again. Your human's courage is fading, Malric mocked. The core cannot save you now. Jake heard Malric's words and felt a flicker of doubt. His strength was draining fast. The enemy was too strong, the shadows too deep. He thought of Earth, of the stories his grandfather told about human perseverance. Humans had crossed oceans without knowing what lay beyond, climbed mountains that tried to kill them, fought enemies with nothing but courage and instinct. He clenched his fists. You think humans break under fear? You don't know us at all. He roared and drove his elbow into Cirrus's jaw. She reeled back, stunned. Jake grabbed her plasma sword and ignited it. The dark energy in the blade recoiled from his touch, but he held on. He spun and drove the sword through Cirrus's chest. The commander gasped. Shadows poured from her eyes and mouth as the blade consumed her corrupted energy. Her body stiffened, then crumbled into ash. The core pulsed in response. Its light grew stronger. The black tendrils shrieked as the energy of the spire surged outward. No, Malric shouted. He summoned a wave of shadow energy and hurled it at Jake. Jake didn't move. He couldn't. He was drained. Lira stepped between Jake and the oncoming shadows. She raised both hands toward the core. The sphere responded, sending a concentrated beam of pure light through her and into the wave of darkness. The energies collided with a deafening crack. Malric screamed as the light engulfed him. His form unraveled, peeling away like smoke in the wind. His voice echoed as he disintegrated. Fear never dies. It only waits. The shadows vanished. The sky above cleared completely, revealing a vast canvas of blue. Sunlight bathed the land. The core settled into a steady, calm glow. Jake dropped to his knees. Lira collapsed beside him. Is it over? He asked. Lira placed her hand on the core. The warmth that met her touch was pure and untainted. She smiled faintly. The darkness is gone. For now. Jake squeezed her hand. You did good, Princess. You too, human. They sat in silence as the sun rose higher. The world was changing. Light had returned to Xalara, but the scars of darkness remained. Jake exhaled. Now what? Elira looked at the core. Now, we rebuild. Together. The core of dawn pulsed once, as if in agreement. The battle was over. The war for hope had just begun. The first true sunrise in 3 centuries stretched across Lira like a golden ribbon unfurling from the heavens. The sky, once imprisoned beneath thick layers of eternal shadow, now gleamed with soft blue hues. The land, long frozen in lifeless ash, stirred with newfound warmth. In the valley beneath Dawnfall Ridge, blades of emerald grass pushed through cracked soil, reaching toward the sun like lost children returning to their mother's arms. At the heart of it all stood the core of dawn, its radiant light stabilizing into a steady rhythmic pulse. Each pulse sent waves of energy across the land, awakening dormant seeds, melting icy rivers, and filling the air with a faint melodic hum, a heartbeat of rebirth. Jake sat slumped against a fallen stone pillar, his body aching from the brutal fight. His plasma rifle lay beside him, its barrel scorched and cracked. Blood seeped through the tears in his armor, staining the ground beneath him. His breaths came slow and shallow, but his eyes remained fixed on Elira, who knelt beside the core with her hands pressed to its surface. Her violet eyes glowed faintly with golden veins tracing her skin like threads of starlight. The wound on her shoulder, though deep, no longer bled. The core had stabilized her, but the battle had left her exhausted. "You okay, Princess?" Jake rasped. Elira turned toward him, managing a faint smile. "I felt better." Jake chuckled weakly. "Yeah, same." The moment of quiet was shattered by a distant rumble. Jake forced himself upright, muscles protesting with each movement. He scanned the horizon. Across the valley, beyond the ruined barricades, dark shapes appeared, hovercrafts. "Council survivors?" Jake asked, gripping his rifle. Elira narrowed her eyes. "No, these aren't council crafts." The hovercrafts approached swiftly, engines thrumming. As they drew closer, Jake saw the insignias painted on their hulls, simple sunbursts with twin stars, the mark of the old royal family. The crafts landed, and their side hatches opened with mechanical hisses. From within emerged groups of civilians, farmers, artisans, engineers, and soldiers in mismatched armor. They stared in disbelief at the blue sky above them. Some dropped to their knees, weeping. Others pointed toward the glowing core. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a weathered face stepped forward, holding an old energy rifle across his chest. His eyes locked onto Elira. "Princess Lira?" he asked, voice rough with emotion. Elira stood, wincing as she cradled her wounded shoulder. "Yes. I am Lira of House Saleth. Who are you?" The man dropped to one knee, bowing his head. "I am Captain Durek Thane of the Dawnlight Rebellion. We've hidden for decades, waiting for the light to return. We've been watching the council crumble since the core's pulse first broke the sky." Elira's breath caught. "The rebellion. My father spoke of you." Durek stood. "We've gathered survivors from across Lira. We heard the core awaken. We saw the sky break open. And now, we stand ready to fight for the dawn." The crowd behind him dropped to their knees. "For the dawn," they cried in unison. Jake whistled softly. "Looks like you've got an army now, Princess." Elira swallowed hard. "An army we'll need." She turned toward the core. Though they had defeated the Shadow Lord and destroyed Malric, the lingering tendrils of shadow energy had not vanished entirely. Darkness, once rooted so deeply in the world, could never be fully erased. The council had been broken, but its agents could still spread fear. And beyond Lira, the Shadow Lord's whispered warning echoed in her mind. "Fear never dies. It only waits." Jake stepped beside her. "You're thinking about what he said, aren't you?" Elira nodded. The Shadow Lord claimed fear was eternal. The council used fear to control the people for centuries. What if they were only the beginning? Jake rubbed his jaw. "Then we fight it wherever it shows up." That's what humans do best, staring into the dark and saying, "Not today." Lira smiled faintly. "You're more optimistic than you look." "Yeah, well, I've been shot, choked, and thrown off cliffs in the past 48 hours. Optimism's cheaper than pain meds." She laughed softly. The sound carried across the valley, reaching the ears of the gathered civilians. They watched her with hope in their eyes, the hope of a people who had lived their entire lives under shadow, and now stood beneath an alien sky bathed in light. "Princess Lira," Captain Thane said, stepping forward again. "What are your orders?" Lira looked at Jake. He gave her a nod. This was her moment, her responsibility. She climbed onto the remains of a fallen stone spire, standing above the crowd. The core's light reflected in her eyes as she spoke. "For 300 years, we lived in fear," she said, voice clear and strong despite her exhaustion. "The darkness stole our skies, our land, our future. The shadow beasts hunted us while the council ruled with cruelty. But today we stand beneath a sky of light. We breathe free air. We feel the warmth of the sun." The crowd murmured in agreement. Tears streaked many faces. "But the darkness will return if we do nothing," Lira continued. "The Shadow Lord's power may be gone, but fear remains. And fear is the true enemy. Fear divides us. Fear weakens us. Fear makes us forget who we are." She placed her hand over her heart. "But humans taught us something long ago. They showed us what courage means. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is standing tall despite fear." She extended her hand toward Jake. He hesitated, then climbed onto the spire beside her. She grasped his wrist and lifted their joined hands into the air. "This human stood with me when the darkness came," Lira declared. "He had no reason to fight for us. No history here, no personal stake in our survival. But he stayed. Because courage does not ask where you're from. It asks what you're willing to protect." The crowd cheered, the sound echoing against the mountain walls. "So today," Lira said, voice rising, "we become more than survivors. We become guardians of the dawn. We will rebuild, and we will defend this light with our lives. Because the shadows will return. But when they come, they will find a world no longer afraid." The crowd roared as one. "For the dawn." Lira stepped down from the spire, legs trembling. Jake caught her before she collapsed. "You sure know how to give a speech," Jake said. Lira gave him a tired smile. "I had a good example." Over the next weeks, the valley transformed. The core of dawn remained at the heart of the valley, stabilizing the planet's climate. The air grew warmer. Rivers unfroze and began to flow. Plants burst from the soil. Birds, long hidden in underground caverns, returned to the surface. Jake led the training of the Dawnlight Militia. Humans were natural tacticians. His earth-born instincts helped the Xalarians adapt their ancient weaponry to modern guerrilla tactics. Lira focused on understanding the core's abilities. Its power was immense but required balance. If misused, it could attract shadow remnants still lurking beneath the surface. One evening, Jake found her sitting on the spire's balcony, watching the stars. He joined her, offering a ration bar. "Thinking about the future?" he asked. She nodded. "The darkness won't stop here. The Shadow Lord wasn't just an enemy. He was part of something bigger. Fear like that doesn't stay contained." Jake took a bite of the ration bar. "Then we fight it together." Lira smiled softly. Together. Above them, the stars shimmered in a sky reborn. The dawn of Xalara had come, but the war against fear was only beginning.